welcome back to another Modern Mind Ancient Book. We've got Pete and Nick here. Welcome, boys.
I'm not going to say your name that way again, but it's good to have you here.
Pedro.
Phil.
Big Nick, which really made me laugh.
Oh, yeah. No, I was Little Nick. Now I'm Big Nick because there's was he a 7 or something?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, because Big Nick is no longer at the church anymore.
Right.
So now you're Big Nick.
Yes.
And then there's Little Nick.
I feel really powerful. I just stomp around everywhere beating my chest.
Just don't get 350 pounds.
Yeah.
I need to get out of that myself. Okay, the book of Micah. A survey on the minor prophet Micah. How long has it been since you've read Micah?
Last year, because I went to the Bible in a year.
Well, reading it once a year is pretty good. I have probably not read Micah in about 6 years.
Probably been that long for me. That was one of those ones that I think the first time I read it may have been when we were supposed to read something for youth group, so I would pick something that was pretty
Odd or whatever.
unusual or
Yeah, I will carefully read these when we start doing the next version of this, but it's a survey.
Yeah.
Okay, so the title, it's shortened from the Hebrew Mikayahu, who is like Yahweh. The Septuagint and English Bibles have and follow the Hebrew title. The Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, the prophets, the law, and the writings. The authorship is attributed to Micah, a Judean, the southern tribes from Moresheth, which was located 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem near Goth. Goth was a Hittite city. He does not give his ancestry, which may be an indication that he was from the common people of Judah. His prophetic ministry focused on the sufferings of the common people who are exploited by the rich and the rulers. That's interesting.
Yes.
That a prophet would be from the common people and not from the priestly class. Micah may not have served in the king's court.
Right.
He might have just been a guy out, I don't know, tending sheep and was called for whatever his livelihood was. We don't know. But he might have just been out and then suddenly the Lord called.
Who was it we had before that was along the same lines? There was one other, was it Amos?
Yeah.
Was outside of the...
Yeah.
The priestly,
So, equal opportunity offender, right?
Right.
God reaches out
You can
in the
use
Bible.
anybody.
And he calls. So, during the Reformation and after, it was a really big deal for lay people to do anything of spiritual significance. The people of God, church at the time, had lost that the lay person could also experience and hear from God.
Right.
It's an interesting concept, especially given that now what do we have? As of this, 700 or 800 years of history from the calling of Moses. Actually, let's go back to Abraham. We don't know if Abraham probably just was a guy in Ur. Now, Ur was a very rich and wealthy and prosperous place, a port city and whatnot, but it doesn't really say that Abram was any sort of special person.
Right, he didn't necessarily have his particular status.
He wasn't, a Lugal or whatever, right? So, okay, well then let's say 1,600 years of history of the God of the Bible just choosing people and giving them things that ended up being true. Micah was not of the king's court, yet his books ended up in the annals of history for Israel as a very important document that would have been recorded and kept at the temple. Kind of cool. Micah dates his prophecies to the days of Jotham, 750 to 732 BC, Ahaz, 736 to 716 BC, and Hezekiah, 716 to 687 BC. That's a long life. The kings of Judah, which he says concerning Samaria and Jerusalem, Micah was a contemporary with Isaiah during the reigns of Ahaz and Hezekiah. Micah 4, 1 through 3, and Isaiah 2, 2 through 4 contain a common prophetic message about a future kingdom. So this is one of those ones, well, they all look forward.
Yeah.
They all look forward.
Well, that's the definition of a prophet.
Yeah. Well, that's quite interesting, right? So if you read rabbinic literature, it's kind of fulfilled and done and over with, or we don't understand it. Maybe it's the future, maybe it's not, oigave, I don't know. But when it comes to our worldview, we do see a lot of forward-looking stuff in every prophet, right? But really forward-looking stuff.
Yeah.
Isaiah, the fact that, Isaiah's a huge book. It's one of the most important ones.
Right.
And Micah somehow made it in there. Micah's depiction of corruption and immorality corresponded well with the reign of Ahaz. Jeremiah recorded that Micah was taken seriously by the people during the reign of Hezekiah. His preaching ministry helped to lead to a revival in Judah that impacted the rulers down to the common people. A street preacher.
Right.
Yeah. Micah was a street preacher.
Yes.
That's cool. I like that. I street preached for about 4 years. I had a good time doing it. It wasn't easy, but it was fun. This would set the parameters of Micah's ministry beginning about 740 BC and concluding about 700 BC. So about 20 years after Hosea.
Right.
But in the southern two kingdoms. This was a period of crisis due to the dominance of the Assyrian Empire. So Israel became a vassal state to Assyria because they had a cool temple, an amazing temple, a belief system that was astonishing to the Assyrians. So when they come and they saw the temple, they were like, wow, what a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Right.
You gotta check it out when it's that cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the wonders of the world.
Right.
And ancient peoples, particularly ancient peoples in the Middle East, or I think they call it Eurasia or something like that. Architecture was a way of having a future, clearly indicating that you were there, that your nation was there, that your nation did something astonishing.
And it worked because we still
Even today.
archaeological digs of that stuff.
Yeah, we love it. They actually did have a much longer view of history than we do. Right. Oftentimes, I don't even think most of us plan for retirement. And these people are thinking 1,000-year reigns ideas. They're thinking in terms of setting up their nation to be in control and in command of multiple and hundreds of... I mean, the first empires were formed in this area, in this area alone, in a highly competitive area. At that, I mean, the changing of hands was quite significant from nation to nation to nation, or city-state to city-state to city-state, up until the Assyrians. This is the height of the Assyrian Empire. They reigned from the west mountains to the sea, from the north mountains to the sea. So it would be the Mediterranean to roughly India, and then from Turkey and parts of Turkey all the way down to the Persian Gulf. A huge swath of land. So the problem with the Assyrians, though, is that they didn't have a very large army. They would go conquer, go conquer, go conquer, go back, reconquer, go back, reconquer, go back, reconquer, and then head the other direction and reconquer again. They basically never were out of war.
Right, it's kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. By the time you get to the end, you gotta go back and start over.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's how the Assyrians ruled. It wasn't really until Cyrus, until the Persian Empire, that you had a more diplomatic look on things, because the Assyrians ruled by just sheer violence. Either you could submit and pay, and the thing is pay what? They didn't have money. There was no money. That's why this region was so tumultuous, because it was about resources. So southern Mesopotamia had fish, arable land, and around the rivers you could have animals and that sort of thing, but no rocks, no lapis lazuli, no gold. None of that. In order to get that, you got to go north. Well, if they don't want to trade with you, what do? You need it. You want it. Conquer them. So that's kind of how it worked, right? If you were hostile, that's fine. We got a bigger army.
And we'll be back.
We'll be back. That's it.
Yeah, and that's how they ruled. So it wasn't until this time. Now, again, I know I said this the last one, but Assyria had already been an empire for many hundreds of years by the time they finally got to the east, and they conquered Israel. This was it. I mean, they had the largest empire in the history of the known world at that point. The only people who had done that, who had sway over that whole region, were the Sumerians. It had been a very, very long time before anybody else had this sort of control. So it was a great crisis because of the dominance of the Assyrians, who were absolutely brutal unless you submitted and paid the money, or goods, I should say. Micah would have witnessed the invasion of Israel by the Assyrians and the resulting deportation of the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom, which weren't just deported, they were split up and taken very far away, like into India.
Yeah, the shuffling like you were talking about earlier.
Everywhere. So it was 10 tribes. They had the hardest time redeveloping the tribal monikers, the names and lineages, because they were gone.
Yeah.
Just totally removed from their land and take it to places that, that it wasn't well-developed areas either.
No, and when you're that far flung, you can't play the long game like the civilizations that you're talking about. You can't build the things that last so everybody knows who you were and you did the important things. It's removed from you.
So they witnessed this deportation of the 10 tribes to the northern kingdoms. The Assyrians had invaded Israel many times over a period of 60 years, culminating in the fall of Samaria to Shalmaneser in 722 BC. 20 years later, Sennacherib would surround Jerusalem and mock Hezekiah. Hezekiah was delivered in answer to prayer as Yahweh sent a death angel to wipe out the Assyrian army, according to 2 Kings 18 through 19. Micah cries out against the social injustices, which include the exploitation of the poor by the rich and the perversion of justice and government by the rulers. There was little truth, since false prophets were numerous and spoke contrary to the prophets of the Lord. It's interesting that Babylon is appearing at this point, because it was Sennacherib who united Elam and the Elamites and the Amorites against the Assyrians, and they conquered the Assyrians. Sennacherib destroyed a 1,000-year reign.
That had to feel good.
Yeah. Including Persia, like this is Proto-Persia.
Right.
All that stuff was forming now at this point in history. So the Assyrians had kind of worn out their welcome in the region. And, Sennacherib himself was a vassal state of Assyria. But while they were on the East Coast, like they always had problems, they didn't have a big enough army, he was plotting with the Elamites and everybody on the west side and saying, well, boys, while the cat's away, let's get this together. And they ended up with the opportunity to destroy Assyria. And they did. When Assyria fell, they fell for good. They never, ever revived again. Mostly because of their brutality.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure that everybody saw to it. If there was even an inkling that they might try to get something together again, so we're going to smash that before it can get off the ground. Yeah.
If they hadn't conquered him, because, I think this would have been the second time that Babylon had revolted. The first time they got crushed. This would have been the second time that they revolted in a continuous fight with Elam. Eventually, they probably would have just went to the west coast and just kept destroying Elam until it was no more. Because this is, honestly, they had been back and forth only like 2 or 3 times over the course of like 800 years. They had mostly been fighting on the west coast the entire time. Because Elam was a very powerful empire. The Elamites conquered the Sumerians.
Second time around, you don't have any mercy.
Yeah.
It's like the old mutant once.
You can learn lessons
twice, they're going to obliterate you,
Yeah, the Assyrians are by far, so when you do ancient Near Eastern studies, you can do sort of the ancient Near Eastern Levant region, like the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians, or you can do Assyriology. It has its own study because of how prolific and powerful they were. So you want to read Micah by imagining that you're a person living with fear at any moment that you could be destroyed. Your home and fields could be overrun. You've looked to the rulers for protection, but they only oppress you. Israel was not the southern 2 tribes were not a very powerful little kingdom. And no area around Israel, none of the Canaanites were ever really powerful empires. They were just small little nations. And that's why Israel was able to conquer so easily, because they didn't unite, right? And this was true, you see it in, like during Avram's day, that it took multiple kings, and then they would come and they would conquer, and then they would go back to their land. That's the way it was. Canaan was very loosely organized.
There were little city-states that every once in a while got together.
Yeah, they followed the city-state idea, not the empire idea. That area was prosperous. Well, that's the reality of it. The land was prosperous enough that you didn't need so much land to have good resources. You could go to Lebanon for cedar. Wasn't that far away. You needed stuff to build, go to Lebanon. They'll trade with you. They have enough too. They weren't hungry. In the Fertile Crescent, the land had begun to be saline because of the water runoff from the mountains. The minerals had started to decrease crops, and people were getting hungry. And when people were hungry, they do horrible things. And so they began to spread out looking for resources. These nations around you were beginning to be out for themselves, also for fear, because the Assyrians were there. The land is filled with breaking God's law, and people are reaping the corruption that they've shown. You're reading this prophet, or hearing this prophet, to understand the plan of the Lord. You know that Yahweh will judge, and you want to prepare yourself for deliverance. You know that God has promised a coming king who would deliver his people and restore the glory of his kingdom. You want to hear the truth of God rather than the false message from the false prophets. Same message. The ancient mind to the modern mind in this one. Same message. What do we believe? The coming king who's coming to restore and deliver. Same message. Israel today is looking for their coming Cyrus, their coming Messiah, their coming anointed one to restore and bring back justice. So the argument is that the Lord will exile Israel because of her oppressive dishonesty, total depravity, and idolatrous worship, and then restore the nation by reestablishing his righteous kingdom and kingdom over the nations of the earth. Restoration, all 12 tribes together. So the nation was split, but the coming king will restore everybody to unity, all 12 tribes. The purpose is to convict the leadership and people of Israel of their breaking the law and encourage them to humble themselves under the Lord's judgment and trust him to establish his king and kingdom in the future. The coming pain, but God is doing it to humble you. This is actually quite an interesting thing for the modern mind, right? What's the purpose of pain? Why does God allow evil? Everybody struggles with these questions, right? And the Assyrians were no slouches when it comes to evil. They would burn the city, rape and murder and kill everything. Take the men of valor, the military men, they would tie their hands and feet, put gigantic hooks through their mouths, and make them march in a line through the desert until they died. No water, no food. You would march until you died. And when you fell down, you ripped the hook out of the guy in front of you, and then they would put the hook in the other cheek and march you until you died. Those were the Assyrians.
I could have slept just fine tonight not knowing that.
It's not the people you want to cross. That's why they were so successful. But that's also why when the chance came, they lost. And what's the coming righteous kingdom? It's not one of violence.
No.
It's not one of servitude by threat. It's not one of broken city-states and fear where you pay as much as they require, whether it meant your people die or not. It's the united kingdom. It's Israel becoming one again under prosperity, under the kingdom of Solomon, where he was worried about being married and making babies and writing songs and art and butterflies.
Right.
That united kingdom.
That united.
As I said, the other one already had their chance of an empire.
That's right.
Now they're like the size of Michigan, so it didn't go well.
Yeah, that united kingdom, and it comes with the anointed one at the helm, the Messiah. That term Messiah for the modern mind is not spiritual, otherworldly leader alone. For the Christian mind, it means the one who comes and appears in the sky. But that's not all it means. It means the one who's anointed to rule, to lead. Thank you for joining us for another Modern Mind Ancient Book. We hope that your time was well spent. It certainly was for us. Have a great one.